He is the outlaw poet of American highways. The braided hair, the bandana, the battered acoustic guitar named Trigger. The voice that sounds like gravel and prayer. Willie Nelson became a symbol of freedom, rebellion, and survival. But the public image hides a quieter truth. The road did not just give him fame. It extracted from him years, marriages, money, lung tissue, and friends lowered into the ground. He was born into rural poverty during the Great Depression. His parents left him behind before he was old enough to understand the word abandonment. By the time he was a boy, he was already working fields and writing songs to fill silence. The price of glory came later in different forms. Collapsing finances, tax seizures, burned homes, failed lungs, and a body that now moves slower than the legend attached to it. What does survival really mean when you outlive almost everyone who started the journey with you? And what happens when the applause fades each night, but the body still carries 92 years of mileage? If Willie Nelson's life has ever meant something to you, leave a like on this video as a quiet tribute. He was born on April 29, 1933, in Abbott, Texas, a small farming town with fewer than 300 people at the time. Abbott sat in Hill County, land defined by cotton fields and church steeples. The Great Depression had already cut through rural Texas. In 1933, nearly 25% of Americans were unemployed. In farming communities, survival depended on weather and debt. Willie Hugh Nelson was the son of Ira Doyle Nelson and Merle Marie. The marriage did not last. His mother left first. His father followed later. By the time Willie was a toddler, he and his older sister Bobby were handed to their paternal grandparents, Alfred and Nancy Nelson. Abandonment is often described emotionally. For Willie, it was practical. 2 children, 2 grandparents, 1 small wooden house. No car. No steady income beyond farming and odd jobs. His grandfather was a blacksmith and farmer. His grandmother sang hymns and believed music was as necessary as bread. The grandparents enrolled the children in church. The church became structure. Willie sang gospel hymns before he understood harmony. His grandmother bought him a mail-order guitar when he was 6. He learned chords by copying others and by repetition. There were no lessons beyond observation. He wrote his first song at 7. During the 1930s and 1940s, rural Texas schools were small and underfunded. Abbott High School had limited resources. Sports, church, and farm labor filled time. Willie worked picking cotton alongside his grandparents. Cotton harvesting is not romantic work. It means bent backs, cut fingers, dust in lungs. He earned pennies per pound. By 9, he was performing locally. By his early teens, he was playing in small bands at dance halls. Texas dance halls in the 1940s were loud, smoky, and often segregated spaces. Country, western swing, and early honky-tonk music shaped his ear. The statistic matters. In 1940, the average annual income in the United States was about $1,368. In rural areas, it was often lower. Music was not seen as a career path. It was a supplement to survival. Willie learned early that music paid in small bills and sometimes in free drinks. He joined his first band, the Texans, while still in high school. They played local venues, sometimes traveling short distances for weekend gigs. He balanced school, farm labor, and music. The pattern of overwork began early. After graduating high school in 1950, he briefly joined the U.S. Air Force. It lasted less than a year. Back problems forced a medical discharge. Physical strain was already part of his life before he turned 20. He enrolled at Baylor University but did not finish. Tuition required money he did not consistently have. He worked odd jobs: disc jockey, bouncer, saddle maker's assistant. He married young. His first marriage was to Martha Matthews in 1952. He was 19. Marriage at 19 in small-town Texas was not unusual. Divorce was. But instability followed him. The marriage produced 3 children and frequent conflict. He was often gone, chasing radio jobs or music opportunities. Reports later described arguments that turned physical and destructive. He admitted to behavior he was not proud of. Poverty and ambition create friction. So does alcohol. In the 1950s, Nashville was the center of commercial country music. Willie moved there in 1960 after earlier stops in Vancouver, Washington, and Houston. Before Nashville, he wrote songs that others recorded. One of them, Family Bible, was sold for a small sum, around $50, because he needed cash immediately. The song later became a hit for Claude Gray. Willie received no royalties from that first sale. This pattern defined his early career, writing songs that gained success in other voices. Crazy became a massive hit for Patsy Cline in 1961. Willie had written it. He was living in a small apartment, struggling to pay bills. The song climbed charts. His financial situation did not immediately change. The Nashville music machine of the early 1960s was rigid. Producers controlled arrangements. Artists wore suits, clean haircuts, structured orchestration. Willie did not fit comfortably into that system. His phrasing was behind the beat. His voice cracked in places. Executives wanted polish. He offered looseness. He signed with Liberty Records and later RCA, but early albums did not sell strongly. The industry categorized him as a songwriter more than a performer. That distinction matters. Songwriters can live in the shadows of their own creations. Meanwhile, his personal life fractured. His first marriage ended in 1962. Accounts describe severe arguments. At one point, according to stories he later told, his wife sewed him into bedsheets after a fight. The marriage collapsed under volatility and absence. He married again in 1963 to Shirley Colley. She was a singer. The marriage overlapped with his growing closeness to another woman, Connie Kepke. When Shirley found hospital bills connected to the birth of Willie's child with Connie, the second marriage ended in divorce in 1971. By the late 1960s, Willie had moderate success as a songwriter, but not the level of fame that would define him later. The strain of chasing recognition created instability. He moved frequently. He drank heavily. He smoked constantly. Cigarettes first, marijuana later. Substances were not unusual in touring circles. They were common. Statistics from the era show that divorce rates in the United States doubled between 1960 and 1980. Musicians on tour faced even higher instability. Long absences and irregular income erode relationships. Willie was not unique in that pattern, but his children lived inside it. In 1969, his house in Ridgetop, Tennessee, burned down. He later described running back into the flames to retrieve two things: his guitar trigger and a pound of marijuana. The story became legend. The practical reality was harsher. Fire means loss of photographs, letters, furniture, and financial records. It means starting again. After the fire, he returned to Texas. This move marked a slow turning point. Austin in the early 1970s was developing a countercultural music scene. Hippies and traditional country audiences began overlapping. Willie grew his hair long. He stopped wearing suits. He leaned into the image that would later define him. But before the rise, there were years of rejection. Nashville had categorized him. Radio stations did not consistently support his records. Promoters hesitated. His unconventional phrasing confused mainstream producers. Financial pressure followed. Songwriting royalties fluctuated. Performance fees were inconsistent. He had multiple children across marriages. Responsibility stretched thin. The romantic idea of the struggling artist hides math: rent, food, school clothes, medical bills. He signed with Atlantic Records in 1973 and recorded Shotgun Willie. It was critically praised but not a major commercial success at first. The album broke structural rules of Nashville production. Sparse arrangements, raw edges. It marked the beginning of what would later be called the outlaw country movement. But at that moment, he was 40 years old and still not a household name. Most artists who have not achieved major commercial breakthrough by 40 quietly fade. Industry statistics show that youth dominates commercial music markets. Willie persisted past the age when many labels consider artists commercially viable. Behind the persistence was routine. Writing daily, playing nightly, driving long distances, eating irregular meals, sleeping on buses or cheap motel beds. The body absorbs that pattern. Poor diet, limited rest, smoke-filled rooms. Decades later, those choices show up in lungs and joints. His third marriage, to Connie Kepke, lasted from 1971 to 1988. It produced 2 daughters. Even during this longer marriage, touring remained constant. Absence remained constant. Throughout the 1970s, he slowly built an audience in Texas. College students and traditional country fans shared space at his shows. This cross-generational appeal was unusual at the time. But building momentum does not erase earlier instability. It layers success on top of unresolved strain. By the mid-1970s, the outlaw country movement, alongside artists like Waylon Jennings, gained traction. Willie's album Red-Headed Stranger, in 1975, became a commercial breakthrough. Yet even that success followed years of dismissal from Nashville executives who had doubted the stripped-down production. But this is still the early reality of his life. Abandonment in childhood, poverty in Texas fields, early marriage and volatility, selling songs for survival, fire consuming his home, industry rejection through his 30s. He once said that his grandparents were his real parents. Both died before he achieved his greatest fame. The people who raised him did not witness the full scale of his success. Childhood shapes appetite. For Willie, it created a hunger for belonging and for stage lights that replaced absent parents. Music became structure. Touring became routine. Applause became feedback. But applause does not repair early fractures. It only distracts from them. This is where the early realities end. A boy born into the Depression, raised by aging grandparents, working cotton fields, writing songs for small sums, watching marriages collapse, standing in the ashes of a burned house, still insisting on playing one more show. By the mid-1970s, the momentum finally tipped in his favor. Red-Headed Stranger sold in numbers that forced Nashville to reconsider him. The album was sparse, almost skeletal. Producers had warned that it sounded unfinished. Radio proved them wrong. The record went multi-platinum. Willie Nelson, now in his early 40s, became a visible figure in American music rather than a background songwriter. The outlaw image solidified alongside artists like Waylon Jennings. Long hair, beards, denim, refusal to obey Nashville's orchestral polish. The outlaw movement was not just aesthetic, it was economic. It meant negotiating creative control, ownership, and touring autonomy. That control brought revenue but also responsibility. In 1976, the compilation album, Wanted, The Outlaws, featuring Willie, Waylon, and others, became the first country album certified platinum. It marked a shift in commercial country music. The audience expanded beyond rural markets into college towns and urban listeners. Willie was no longer chasing opportunity. Opportunity began chasing him. Then came Stardust in 1978, an album of pop standards produced by Booker T. Jones. Industry executives again doubted the concept. A country outlaw singing pre-rock American standards seemed commercially risky. The album spent years on the charts. It sold millions. Commercial success accelerated everything. More shows, larger venues, longer tours. Between the late 1970s and early 1980s, Willie sometimes performed over 200 nights a year. That pace is mechanical. Load-in, soundcheck, performance, bus ride, brief sleep, repeat. The body absorbs vibration from highway miles. The lungs absorb smoke-filled backstage air. Meals happen at irregular hours. Substances were embedded in the culture. Marijuana became part of his public identity. He smoked heavily for decades. He later stopped smoking cigarettes after health scares, but for years his lungs carried both tobacco and cannabis residue. In his 70s, he would face breathing problems linked to that accumulation. The outlaw image made him relatable to fans who distrusted institutions. Ironically, institutions would later become his most formidable opponent. By the 1980s, Willie was not just a musician. He was a businessman, an investor, and a brand. He opened clubs. He invested in ventures that were not always stable. He trusted friends and associates with financial oversight. Trust without close supervision can turn into exposure. In 1984, he recorded "To All the Girls I've Loved Before" with Julio Iglesias. The duet became an international hit. Willie's reach extended beyond country audiences into global markets. He appeared in films. He toured overseas. His name carried commercial weight. In 1985, he co-founded Farm Aid with Neil Young and John Mellencamp. The first concert raised millions for struggling American farmers. The cause connected directly to his childhood in rural Texas. During the 1980s farm crisis, thousands of family farms faced foreclosure. Interest rates were high. Commodity prices were low. Suicide rates among farmers increased. Willie positioned himself publicly as an advocate. But advocacy does not immunize someone from personal financial collapse. Throughout the 1980s, his earnings were high, but so were his expenses. Multiple properties, touring staff, band salaries, family obligations, investments that did not always perform. The Internal Revenue Service began scrutinizing his tax filings. In 1990, the IRS claimed that Willie Nelson owed approximately $16.7 million in unpaid taxes. The number was staggering. It resulted from disallowed tax shelters and accumulated penalties. For context, the median household income in the United States in 1990 was around $30,000. The sum represented more than 500 average annual household incomes. Federal agents seized assets. They confiscated properties, equipment, and personal items. Headlines described one of the largest individual tax bills in U.S. history at the time. The outlaw who had challenged Nashville now faced the federal government. The seizure was not theoretical. It meant inventory lists, property auctions, accountants sorting through decades of paperwork. It meant public humiliation. Financial failure became visible. Willie responded by recording the IRS tapes, "Who'll Buy My Memories?" In 1992. The album's proceeds went toward paying the debt. It was a practical act. He also restructured payment agreements. By 1993, much of the debt had been settled through asset sales and revenue. The scandal carried emotional cost. Financial mismanagement damages trust inside families and business partnerships. He had to admit that he had relied too heavily on advisors. He had signed documents without always understanding long-term consequences. Fame does not equal financial literacy. During this period, his marriages continued to shift. His third marriage to Connie Kepke ended in 1988. In 1991, he married his fourth wife, Annie D'Angelo. Stability improved, but the earlier decades left a trail. 7 children from multiple relationships. Blended families require constant negotiation. The 1990s also brought personal losses. In 1991, his son Willie Nelson died by suicide at age 33. The method was hanging. The location was a family property. Suicide rates among men in the United States have historically been significantly higher than among women. In the early 1990s, firearms and hanging were common methods. For Willie, statistics became personal. A parent burying a child disrupts the natural order. Interviews from that period show him speaking quietly about Billy's death. Grief did not stop touring. Shows continued. Applause continued. Grief traveled with him on buses and airplanes. He also lost close collaborators over time. Waylon Jennings died in 2002 due to complications from diabetes. Johnny Cash died in 2003. Chris Christopherson withdrew from public life due to health issues later in life. The circle that had defined outlaw country thinned. Survivorship carries isolation. Through the 1990s and 2000s, Willie remained prolific. He recorded dozens of albums across genres: country, jazz, blues, reggae. He collaborated with younger artists, bridging generations. Yet each year added mileage to his body. He developed emphysema-like breathing issues in later decades. Though not always formally labeled in public medical detail, he acknowledged lung damage. Years of smoking contributed. He quit cigarettes in the early 1980s after a collapsed lung scare but continued marijuana use through other methods. Touring into his 70s required adjustments. Shorter sets, careful scheduling, medical monitoring. The bus became both transport and controlled environment. The industry itself changed. Physical album sales declined sharply after the early 2000s due to digital distribution. Artists relied more heavily on touring revenue. Willie had always relied on touring. In this sense, he was structurally prepared for the shift. But aging bodies do not recover as quickly from constant travel. He continued to support Farm Aid annually. The event became tradition. It also became a reminder of time passing. Each year added to the list of absent peers. In 2012, at age 79, he released Heroes. In 2018, at 85, he released Last Man Standing. The title carried weight. Many of his contemporaries were gone. He continued to record and perform, often releasing at least one album per year well into his 80s. But the cost of decades surfaced in quieter ways. In 2018, he canceled tour dates due to breathing problems and the flu. Public statements cited health concerns. Fans worried. At that age, respiratory infections can escalate quickly. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention note that adults over 65 are at significantly higher risk of complications from influenza and pneumonia. He returned to the road after recovery. The pattern repeated in smaller cycles. Brief illness, canceled shows, resumed touring. Financially, he rebuilt stability after the IRS crisis. But the psychological imprint of federal seizure does not disappear easily. Public tax humiliation reshapes a person's approach to money and trust. Throughout his career, he maintained a reputation for generosity. Stories circulated of him giving money to friends, paying band members during slow periods, helping family members. Generosity without tight accounting can reopen vulnerability. Yet he continued to prioritize loyalty over strict financial caution. The outlaw image aged with him. Braids turned white. The bandana remained. Trigger, his Martin guitar, accumulated visible wear, holes in the wood from decades of strumming. The guitar became a physical record of time. Wood thinned by friction. Strings replaced repeatedly. It mirrored his own body, worn but functional. He entered his 90s still performing. That longevity is statistically rare. Life expectancy for American males born in 1933 was approximately 58 years. Willie more than doubled that expectation. Survival became part of his legend. But survival also means attending more funerals than birthdays. It means watching cultural relevance shift while trying to remain present. It means negotiating contracts while scheduling doctor appointments. The rise gave him wealth, recognition, awards, and influence. It also delivered federal seizure, public scandal, buried children, and a body altered by decades of smoke and travel. The applause never fully stopped, but neither did the consequences. 92 years means joints that do not bend the way they once did. It means lungs that measure air in shorter pulls. It means waking up with stiffness that must be worked out before speech, before guitar, before stepping onto a bus. At 92, Willie Nelson does not live inside the mythology that surrounds him. He lives inside a body that has traveled millions of miles. The braids are thinner now. The hair is white and pulled back carefully. His hands show visible tremor at times, a common condition in advanced age. Essential tremor affects millions of older adults. For a guitarist, even minor tremors require compensation. Grip adjusts. Strumming becomes more economical. The right hand conserves motion. Trigger, the Martin N20 classical guitar he has played since 1969, carries a hole worn completely through the wood near the sound hole. Decades of contact between pick and spruce created that opening. Luthiers have reinforced it repeatedly. The guitar is not replaced because it fits his hands the way an old tool fits a mechanic. At 92, muscle memory matters more than experimentation. His touring schedule is reduced compared to earlier decades, but it has not stopped entirely. Sets are shorter. He often remains seated during performances. Oxygen is not publicly visible on stage, but backstage accommodations for older performers typically include medical monitoring, hydration protocols, and controlled rest intervals. At his age, dehydration can cause dizziness and arrhythmia. Staff members watch closely. Respiratory health has been his most consistent vulnerability. Years of cigarette smoking early in life and decades of marijuana use contributed to chronic lung strain. In interviews during his 80s, he acknowledged breathing problems and bouts of pneumonia. Pneumonia in adults over 65 carries significantly higher hospitalization rates. Recovery is slower. Each infection leaves a trace. He stopped smoking cigarettes decades ago after a collapsed lung scare. In recent years, he has largely moved away from inhaled cannabis, turning instead to edibles and tinctures. The shift was practical. Damaged lungs cannot tolerate continued smoke exposure indefinitely. Sleep changes in advanced age. Many older adults experience fragmented sleep cycles. Touring complicates that further. Even on a luxury bus, vibration and irregular schedules interrupt deep sleep. Fatigue accumulates faster now than it did in his 40s. He compensates by spacing performances and prioritizing rest days. Cognitively, he continues to write songs. Creativity does not follow a strict age limit. However, memory retrieval can slow in nonagenarians. Lyrics once recalled instantly may now require prompts or teleprompter assistance. On stage, monitors often display words discreetly. This is not unusual for performers of any age, but at 92 it becomes essential insurance. Diet becomes strategic. High-protein meals support muscle retention. Hydration prevents blood pressure drops. At his age, falls present serious risk. A hip fracture in a person over 90 carries high morbidity. Movement is deliberate. Stairs are taken carefully. Railings matter. His fourth marriage to Annie D'Angelo has provided stability for over 3 decades. Long-term partnership in old age reduces mortality risk statistically. Married older adults often live longer due to shared monitoring of health and routine. She travels with him frequently, creating continuity in an otherwise mobile existence. The list of those no longer present grows longer each year. Waylon Jennings gone. Johnny Cash gone. Chris Christopherson stepped back from public life due to cognitive decline before his death. Merle Haggard gone. The outlaw generation is largely archived in recordings and photographs. Survivorship at 92 carries psychological weight. When contemporaries disappear, identity shifts. He becomes the elder statesman not by ambition but by default. Interviews now often focus on legacy rather than new releases. Questions shift from "what's next?" to "how does it feel to look back?" Looking back is not purely sentimental. It is statistical. A man born in 1933 who lived through World War II as a child, the civil rights movement as a young adult, Vietnam, Watergate, the digital revolution, and the COVID-19 pandemic has witnessed systemic transformation. During the pandemic, older adults were identified as the highest risk group. Touring paused. Isolation increased. For performers accustomed to crowds, forced stillness can feel unnatural. He resumed performing after pandemic restrictions eased, though cautiously. Vaccination campaigns prioritized seniors. Age became both vulnerability and qualification. Financially, he no longer lives under the threat that defined the early 1990s. The IRS debt was resolved decades ago, but the lesson remains embedded. Financial oversight around him is more structured. The earlier seizure changed how contracts are reviewed and how advisors are vetted. He continues to support farm aid annually. The cause links him back to the cotton fields of Abbott, Texas. Many of the small farms he once advocated for have disappeared. Consolidation in agriculture has accelerated over the last 40 years. The number of U.S. farms has declined while average farm size has increased. His advocacy now functions as preservation rather than rescue. Physically, endurance is finite. Touring at 92 requires calculated pacing. Travel days are structured around medical needs. Assistants manage medications. Blood pressure, oxygen saturation, and heart rhythm are monitored more closely than in earlier decades. Aging also narrows social circles. Children and grandchildren form the core. He has 7 children from multiple relationships. Some have pursued music. Family gatherings now span 4 generations. Great-grandchildren see him less as outlaw icon and more as elderly patriarch. Mortality becomes less abstract at this stage. Actuarial tables place average life expectancy for a 92-year-old American male at only a few additional years. Each birthday becomes statistically improbable. He has already outlived the average American male by more than 15 years. The voice has changed. It carries more air. Phrasing remains behind the beat, but breath control dictates tempo. Songs are often performed in slightly lower keys to accommodate range shifts. This is standard adaptation among aging singers. Vocal cords lose elasticity. Lung capacity declines. Technique compensates. There is no dramatic collapse. No singular catastrophic event defines his 90s so far. Instead, there is gradual narrowing, fewer shows, slower movement, controlled breathing, scheduled rest. The tragedy at this stage is not scandal or seizure. It is attrition. He once ran into a burning house to save a guitar. At 92, he avoids unnecessary risk. Fire has been replaced by caution. The body cannot be replaced the way property can. The public still sees the braids and bandana. The image remains consistent. But backstage, there are heating pads, prescription bottles, careful meal planning, and conversations about stamina. He has buried a son. He has resolved a federal debt that could have ended his career. He has outlived collaborators and rivals. He has survived pneumonia, respiratory strain, and the mechanical grind of 6 decades on the road. The tragedy is not a single event. It is accumulation. Abandoned as a child. Financially exposed at his peak. Grieving a son. Breathing through lungs that carry decades of smoke. Standing on stage while knowing the margin for error narrows each year. Yet he continues to walk out when his name is called. At 92, survival itself becomes the headline. Not because it is glamorous, but because it is statistically rare and physically demanding. When the lights dim after a show, he does not step into legend. He steps carefully down a few stairs, guided by staff, conserving energy for the next morning. The outlaw image promised freedom. The final chapter of life imposes limits, and still he plays.